Good evening, our eminent guests, organizers, and participants. It's really heartening to see so many of you join us this evening. I would like to start by welcoming everyone on the panel. Dr. Kavita, from School of Business, Christ University.
Thank you. Thank you, Tapasya.
Professor Pushpesh Pant, former professor JNU and recipient of the Padma Shri Award. Dr. Sanjeev Sharma, Registrar, Ansel University, Gurgaon. And Dr. Anil Kashyap from University of West England, Bristol. So I welcome you first. Thank you for joining us today. And before we start, I would also like to welcome everybody who's joined us from all over the world and is tuned in to know about a little bit more about the question which has been probably the only thing occupying our mind for the last 40 or 50 days. We've all been talking about it, we've all been reading about it, and we're all getting information in different formats from all over the place, leading to a lot of myths, a lot of confusion, probably some speculations which are being passed off as information. So today what we are going to discuss is a very important point, or I would say a set of discussions which are related to socio-economic, health and environmental impact of COVID-19. This is in the wake of pandemic, when everyone's probably wondering if this lockdown 4.0 is the last one. Are we ever going back to what we were doing, or should we really go back to what we were doing, etc., etc. But what has already happened and what is its impact is something that we would like to know from the expert panel here. And Ansel University has brought together a very, very, I would say, curated panel of experts who will bring to us their expertise within their own fields and are going to sort of answer a few questions and give their opinion about what will be the impact and what is probably the nature of the impact and the long and short term impact, and etc., etc. And if they see any way out of this, maybe some recommendations. So a little background to why we started thinking about this. I think if I'm not wrong, this morning we had about almost 80,000 cases which have been reported, and government has taken some proactive measures by imposing the lockdown and helping us realize the importance of social distancing and whatever minimum we can do to not come in contact or not spread this virus any further. But having said that, it's we are all also speculating a lot of things because of that same reason, the social isolation that many people are feeling, or maybe the speculation of the economic and the other environmental impacts that people are now beginning to think about since we have time on hand, and also maybe we are being bombarded with a lot of information. So I would say a WhatsApp message which talks about, okay, so this is going to go away because we are in a cold country or we are in a hot country, etc., etc. Those are the physical things. But this is going to go away because we are happy, or we are going to be happy, or we are going to make it happen. So many, many things that come to our mind, and maybe many, many things that we've been discussing at our end. So I would like to start by I would say introducing the first of the speakers. And introducing the format for the day. We are going to go through different scales. We would run through from the community level to personal level to how that structure of economy works for both these entities together and apart. And then finally, how the environment, which is the larger envelope, is going to get affected by us, and how can we have a further positive impact on it later. So the first panelist to start the discussion today is going to be Professor Pushpesh Pant. He's a well-noted Indian academic. I discovered a very, very well-written food critic and historian, and he's retired as a professor of international relations from JNU, Delhi, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And he's also an expert on international relations, Indian cuisine, columnist, has been published in Forbes, Open, Outlook, Times of India, Tribune, and he's authored many, many books which have been bestsellers in culinary, I would say culinary science, and he's been also named by the New York Times as one of the best cookbooks of the year. The cookbook that he published in 2011. So he's also been lately awarded by the Padma Shri, like I mentioned earlier, in 2016. And I would like to start with Professor Pant, posing to him, what are your views about the social impact that the event of COVID or the pandemic has had in our immediate scenario, and what would be its long and short-term impacts, like in the following decades and following years, in your opinion? So welcome, Professor Pant, again, and I will now leave the dice for you. Thank you.
Tapasya, you've been very more than generous in your introduction, and I think you also point out my irrelevance in this discussion. Because you see, if you are a retired person who's been trying to ride 2 boats or 2 horses at the same time, his expertise is highly sustained. So I was always looked down as a food person in the International Relations Department. And in the food business, they thought that I was a trespasser from the International Relations Department. But that apart, I think a person of my age who's around 70, 75, takes on a cataclysmic event of this kind very differently, because you know that your days are numbered on this planet. Very many younger people have been claimed by COVID. And even if COVID had not stricken, you were living on borrowed time, so to speak. So one was not looking forward to having the commutation of the pension coming back to your funds. And you look at it with a certain sense of detachment. You also happen to be a small microscopic minority, social scientist or not a social scientist, when you have a roof over your head, a bed under you, more than 2 square meals in a day. And when you look at those heart-wrenching pictures on the screen, people walking back miles, hundreds of miles back home, you suddenly realize that the impact of this COVID has hit people differently. And then one lives, even as a person in old age, with grandchildren. So their response to what is happening is totally different. The youngest granddaughter I have is worried about going back and meeting her friends in the school. The elder sister is worried about will the exams take place or not take place. She was taking her board ICSE. So conflict reports. You have these people stranded in Kota being brought back. So there are people who are worried still when the country is going through the COVID war crisis kind of thing, that will the JEE take place in time? Will the IS preliminaries take place in time? So I think what this event has brought clear is the fissures, deep lying fault lines in our society between the rich and the poor, the urban and the rural, the so-called highborn and the low caste, the backward, the daily wage earners. And I think these cleavages are not going to go away. So what you said in your preliminary remarks, that people probably are thinking that lockdown would be lifted, it will be relaxed, we will go back to life before COVID. So the cancer was the big C at one time. But after COVID, I think the cancer is going to be seen in a small lower case. So there are far more competent people than me to discuss here the medical dimension of it, the economic dimension of it, the environmental dimension of it. I started off originally as a student of history. And in my life till this date, I've seen some calamities. I've seen some earthquakes in Uttarkashi, some landslides, some horrific things. I've lived through 1962 Sino-India War. I've lived through in Delhi when Ambala was bombarded in 65. And some friends accidentally drove into a trench and lost their lives that way. There was a scare. I have seen through the 1971 liberation of Bangladesh. I've driven through communal riot hit areas, but nobody has ever prepared us for something like this. Something which is global, something which is pan-Indian, and something which you have to cope at a level as an individual to avoid getting an infection, playing it safe, and also live responsibly. So I think, the whole social contract, not only in India, but globally is going to be renegotiated. It is not only that in India we are blaming the Tablighi Jamaat people for that, the Sikh pilgrims for that, the poor migrants feeding us, going to Azadpur Mandi and creating a new hotspot in Delhi or in Chennai, or domestic assistance being given up. So the dystopian vision which Prayag Akbar had in his great novel, Leela, it seems to be coming through. We are living through very surreal times where our relationship with our own family members is going to change. Nobody till very recently had lived with grown-up adolescent children at home. They were either in boarding schools, living with their peers. Now we have to perchance live with them. Those of us who are fortunate to have a grandparent at home, probably can palm off the kids to the grandparents. There can be a bonding between them. But how many husband and wives were living in domestic nuptial bliss? So they have to live together under these circumstances. And working from home is a very interesting, odd concept, where once you start working from home, would you like to go back to do a 10 to 5 job somewhere when all you did was the same thing from home? With a good high-speed internet, like the webinar we are working on. So once this happens, how is it going to impact on the other business I'm very fond of, the food business? Will ever there be a revival of the 5-star, 7-star deluxe hotels? With the international air travel gone for a 6? We have just heard this morning's newspaper, many of us hear news, read news now, but the rail reservations have been cancelled till 30th June again. So if the train transport is not there, if the air transport is not there, if the daily migrants have moved out of the city, if the hotels and restaurants are not, they're opening at 30%, 20% capacity, will people have disposable income to splurge on these places? Will they ever get back to the hotel? So what is going, people will not stop eating off, obviously. People don't stop eating either before birth or after death. So the point is that dhaba eating probably will continue on the I'm afraid we have to live with very difficult times to come. I just excuse myself for a minute. I have to, and I'll be back soon. In the meantime, you can pass on the discussion.
Thank you, Professor Pant. There's a slight, I think this is what he meant by working from home. You have to work with everything. And I don't think that is something that anybody can laugh off anymore. We are all, I think it has brought us to the equal level. We are all in the same place. I think he's back.
I guess I'm back.
Back to you, Professor Pant. Yeah, you still have, yeah.
Yes, you see, this is part of the hazard which I was saying.
Yes.
That if you are the only old man around in the house who answers the doorbell, who takes the deliveries at home, who gives the garbage man to the garbage out, who handles the plumber, and I am supposed to be keeping away from all physical contact, but perforce there is use of an old man post-retirement at the moment. But at the same time, the people have a different perspective on life after COVID. So the young, as usual, will dream and continue to be optimistic. You did mention a long term and a short term. And I remember that Lord Maynard Keynes said in the long run, all of us are dead. So the older look at death more with a certain amount of detachment. The young think it is an accident. But the point is that what is going to be the long term and the short term for COVID? I think the short term is not going to be less than 3 years. Let's forget about the lockdown. Let's talk about partial normalcy return. And the long term is going to be almost 10 years.
Sorry. All right. So I'm sorry. I just got tuned out just for a moment. There is, I think, some issue with the sound. If that's for the organizing team, if you can take care of that. The volume seems to be not reaching everyone equally.
You mentioned glitches, and it is now a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I'm sorry about that. I said it too early. But thank you, Professor Pant. I have a few points I can take away from your discussion. I mean, you at the beginning very rightly brought about the social fissures and these social contrasts that you were mentioning, and half of us, or maybe I don't even know the exact percentage, but how many of us feel privileged and how many of us are not looking at this in the same way, or not. Rather, like you said, even in age groups, we don't see the end of this, or the term that when this ends, I will blah 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 will be different for all of us. I guess. But to be just asking you to push this a little further, could you share with us what you feel is right now our role as the participants might be anticipating, everybody's role collectively, to do anything different or to make a difference. So from your perspective, from your view of where you see this community dealing with this, what is the kind of subject areas or questions we should be asking? You have a lot of questions in what you put forward to us, but what should we be asking actually and researching or talking?
I think all of us should be asking questions not to each other but to the government. I think the primary responsibility is that if we live in a country which has constitutional rule of law and fundamental rights, and there is equality before law, I fail to see how the Supreme Court can abdicate its responsibility and take on an urgent hearing a case referring to temporary relief to Mr. Arnab Goswami and postpone for eternity, as far as they are concerned, for 2 weeks, the problem of the migrant laborers. I can't imagine living in a country where the Attorney General says there are no migrants on the road. And then if you don't wish to see, all I can say is there are none so blind as those who don't wish to see. I, as an old man, am an angry old man. And this is not the country I thought I would live till the end of my life. So I think the violation of the human right, and I don't think that the percentages question you are raising is important. All of us know the percentages by heart. More than 1/3 of India's population, according to Arjun Gupta committee, lives under poverty line on $1 a day, then or less. And the other 2/3 is hardly up there. And 5% or 10%, not even 2% of the population of this country owns more than half the GDP of this country. So even if the relief package which has come this afternoon, which is coming in installments, is addressing to micro MSMEs, and the definition of a micro industry is which has a turnover of 1 crore. So you will get an interest-free loan, you will get one without collateral, but what about the majority of the people? So I see this as snowballing into not a greatness of India dream beating the coronavirus, but creating social unrest, anarchy, economic disruptions down the line. So right now we have bought some time, some respite, and we can keep slapping our back and enjoy that our casualty rates are much less. More Americans have died, our herd immunity is more. So ultimately we are accepting that the herd immunity of the cattle class people is going to save you in the end. But are they going to? I'm reminded of Adiga's white tiger story, that will you ever be able to trust your driver with your car again, ever? Would you let a domestic assistant come inside the house when the domestic assistant knows that you betrayed them when they needed you most? So I am a worried person. And I think the questions you ask, I think our role is very clearly defined. We are privileged. Let's not say that how many of us realize we are not privileged. We are worried about our DA deductions. We are worried about the income tax relief being given to us. How does it make a difference whether you are paying 33% or 25%? Because then your gross income is about 12 lakhs a year in any case. You are in a stratified atmosphere. How do you talk of Bombay as a city where there is a 29th floor Attila and there is a Dharmi slum at the same time? So I'm not really, I think India is a land of great variety, but what sustained hope was equality before law and the rule of law, fundamental rights protected by judiciary. But when the judiciary says, in all its wisdom, Supreme Court, which Rajiv Dhawan, my good friend, once wrote a book called Supreme but Not Infallible, it says we are not inclined to interfere with what the government is doing. The reluctance to judiciary to interfere with something which is patently, obviously wrong, infuriates me. And the servility of the media does. So it remains to a person who's semi-literate like me or educated, half illiterate, maybe stuttering at this age, but to let people say, ask questions, ask your representatives to be responsible. And it is not only the Resident Welfare Association volunteers who are doing it.
I think that's a very valid suggestion. I mean, I would say that's looking at the fundamental rights and actually looking deeper into the labor laws and the rights of people who are not reading those rights, I would say. So I think that's a very valid point that you make there, and with that kind of discussion about how the community is taking the whole thing, or how are we impacted at that community level. I mean, thanking Professor Pant and actually moving to the next discussion, which is this is impacting all of us differently, yes, but this is actually having rather a physical and mental and phenomenological impact on us. We see ourselves. I mean, the term that walls will close in or walls are closing in is now being experienced and probably said and talked about more. So that brings me to our next panelist, Dr. Sanjeev K. Sharma, and he has this baton of talking about the health, the impact on health of COVID. And may I just introduce Dr. Sharma before we move? He's got a PhD in biochemistry from IARI Pusa, New Delhi. His field of research is very relevant to ask all the important biochemistry and microbiology kind of questions. His interest is molecular biology and genetic engineering, and he's got a varied academic experience, including starting off being an assistant professor in biotechnology at Tanzil Institute of Technology, and he's authored books on biochemistry and clinical pathology, which was published by Tata Publishers. And he's won a couple of prestigious national awards for the projects Designer Babies and gene cloning. So without taking this further, and he's currently chairing the position of registrar at Tanzil University. So he's also worried about probably the gamut of students in the university and their health. So Dr. Sharma, I would like you to start discussing this with the question that we think that the community's health in totality is a different dynamic, but it has got components of these individual beings, and they are right now under stress. And I don't know, the significance is probably varied for different people. But as an expert, what is your assessment of impact of COVID and impact on all individuals within our communities and probably inter communities? So the dais is all yours, Dr. Sharma. I think Dr. Sharma, you're muted.
Thank you, Tapasya, for this wonderful introduction and setting the dais, and very good evening to my co-panelists and all the participants. We know all that there is a very important Darwin's theory struggle for existence and survival of the fittest. Be it fittest in terms of immunity right now, or maybe health. But if we see that out of thousands and thousands who are infected by COVID-19, it's only very few who are able to come out of this infection. Now let's look it into from two aspects. One is healthcare, which is the topmost priority of anyone on the globe right now. We all know that it's unprecedented time where both healthcare providers as well as patients, they are equally scared by this infection. The second aspect is healthcare sector. I'll come little later. Now, if I'll talk about the healthcare, we know that COVID, it emerged in end of December, end of 2019. It started threatening the health and life of millions of people after a few weeks. And maybe because of this global integration, maybe because of travel, it has led to a pandemic spreading quickly, making it deadliest of all witnessed in our life till date. Now, the WHO point of view, what issued guidelines that we should look at from two aspects. One is from the biomedical aspect, where we are looking only under the preventive and medical action. This biomedical, we know that patients who are suffering from COVID-19, they generally develop respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and it causes a lot of injury to the lungs. But if you look on to simultaneous study recently published by JAMA Neurology from American Medical Association, it showed that this COVID virus is creating an impact on medulla oblongata, part of brain, which controls our cardiorespiratory system. Now we can imagine that what could be the impact. And at the same time, if our lungs are impaired by this virus, this lack of oxygen, this impaired lungs, they can cause negative effect to heart, kidney, brain. So that is definitely one aspect we have to see how serious it could be, the infection of COVID-19. The second thing is that from different aspects, those patients who are already suffering from cancer, HIV, kidney problems, this COVID-19 has created a gap in the care of those patients, and those who have initiated or those who are at an initial stage of these ailments, they may have a long-term impact. Now, they may not be able to get complete radiotherapy, dialysis, chemotherapy, just either because of lockdown, either because of financial, either because of the phobia of this infection. That is one aspect from the biology. If you look on to psychological aspect, which is very important, patients who are already infected, they are having a phobia that what will happen to them. what kind of impact this COVID will leave on them, whether they will survive or not. Their relatives, they are also having a very different type of psychological effect, that what will happen to their family members, whether they are also infected by the COVID or not, what is the indirect effect, outcome of. So all these things, they are creating a effect on both who are suffering, those who are giving care, and those, the family members. Now, my co-panelist has raised a very important issue, economic disruption or economic disparity. If you look on to around 191 countries, they have imposed school closure. I know that those countries who are having high income group, they have shifted to remote teaching or online teaching. But the low income countries, only 30% have digital infrastructure. Now the students and teachers of those low income countries were not self-sufficient digital infrastructure. There's a mental trauma that their career is jeopardized, elevated rates of stress. The second aspect, those people who are under quarantine, they have unusual routine now, they have unusual livelihood, they have different level of loneliness, stress, suicidal tendency. That kind of behavior is developing, which is again a very major concern. Let me take you to a very different directions. I'm again in the same way what my co-panelist was thinking of economic disruption or diversity or disparity. Around 368.5 million children across 143 countries, they normally rely on school meals for their nutritional source, reliable source of nutrition. Can we imagine what kind of nutritional deficiency they are going to suffer because of this lockdown? Now, global recession, it is leading to the reproductive, you can say, health of the pregnant lady, the antenatal take care which should be given, reduced immunization, the newly born child, if is suffering from pneumonia, ventilators are available or not. Can we imagine what kind of disruption, what kind of disturbance in the entire health mechanism sector it has developed because of this COVID-19? Now, let me throw some light on this healthcare sector also. Although it has opened, this COVID-19 has opened multiple opportunities for the healthcare sector, and I'm glad to share that India has the best response and scored perfect 100 on Oxford COVID-19 government response tracker, along with New Zealand, Mauritius, and Israel. But the silver lining is that we immediately implemented the protective measures. We immediately emphasized on hand hygiene, face mask, maybe some in the same initiative of Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which has made tangible effect. But on the other side, if we know that this particular pandemic has strained the healthcare system worldwide, even those countries who were known for the best infrastructure, best health infrastructure like Spain, Italy, they are suffering. We know the conditions. So if we compare to India, if I focus on India, we know that we have still many things to be done, many efforts are required in Indian scenario for infrastructure, health infrastructure development. It may be strengthening of health infrastructure by, you can say, government or public-private partnership, which is now very much required. Initiative guidelines of Ayushman Bharat we have to follow. And at the same time, increased use of technology. We know that now there is a huge demand has developed throughout the globe.
Dr. Sharma, we've lost your voice. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, okay. Raising my hand to say we're
Okay.
on time, but yeah, I mean, if you would like to conclude.
Yeah, I just want to conclude that we have to think about the development of medical equipments, ventilators, PPE, masks, and the another side, we have to see those patients who are coming throughout the world to India for their treatment. Last, I want to say that there is no drug right now for COVID-19. Even this hydroxychloroquine, it is not reliable and may have side effect. And even if it is reliable, we must understand that our genome responds to every medicine in a different way. Vaccine is yet to come. So I leave you, all the audience, with a thought that if I remove I, if I replace I by we, illness become wellness. This is, we have to think in the current direction. We have to think, as Professor Pant was saying, we have to now reinitiate our efforts for strengthening the healthcare sector, healthcare facilities, and we have to take the prevention so that we can control this pandemic at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. I think you have embedded all those research points for people to think about, ask more questions. There are several questions already that are displayed on my screen for you, which I'm going to combine and redirect at you at the end of this. And at this point that you have heard two of our panelists already give their point of view, I would like to open the question and answer session. Will happen at the end, but I would like to open this at this point for you to put questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. With that thought, from all the important points of lack of nutrition, that's a very important point, you know, that may be going back to Professor Pant's idea of, you know, how we are now marginalizing this whole impact. Like, we are also getting different impacts. So that is a very important thing. And the other one, which you, I think you really rightly pointed out, that the lack of digital infrastructure is causing another kind of stress for many of the students and probably people who are unable to get into action in this work from home mode. So I guess those are, I mean, for me, quite relevant points to think about and take forward. And from there that this whole dilemma seems to bring the moolah in the picture, the idea of how are we on the front of before we pay the taxes, how are we in the front of where is the whole thing going to go in terms of economics, and the balance has, you know, sort of been now a point of re-evaluation is emerging. So I'm going to you know, bring on board now our next panelist, Dr. Kavita Mathur. She holds a PhD in economics from Karnataka University, and her topic is economic reforms and international trade in India and evaluation. Very, very, very relevant now for us to, you know, go back and look at. She's a gold medalist recipient and a first rank holder in Masters of Art in Karnataka University. She was previously engaged with many funded research, including outward foreign direct investment and domestic investments in BRICS. And currently she is a professor at School of Business and Management, Christ University. And I think this is all that we need at the moment for you to give us more, you know, know-how about, you know, our individual health now sort of determines, I would say, our productivity, our willingness to invest in consumer goods, services, luxury, thereby it's affecting production, supply, etc. These are the only terms that come to my mind when I speak about my state of the number of questions I have in my mind. Could you provide us with your expert view about the long and short term impact of COVID on the economics of the whole situation?
Okay, so thank you, Tapasya. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me on this wonderful panel. To start with, the latest announcement, Lockdown 4.0 and the special economic package of rupees 20 lakh crore has left our people to swing between aspire and denial. You know, they're finding out the right balance between the optimism and realism. Currently, COVID cases are touching almost 75,000 with almost 2,400 plus deaths. Home Ministry says that the recovery rate is at 31.15%. I mean, of course, these numbers look a little scary, but when we see these numbers in terms of the population of India, it's relatively, you know, it convinces us, it tells us that we are still in a better position compared to the rest of the world. When we talk about the rest of the world, talking about the most developed countries like US, European zone, these are the countries which are highly hit, and if you look at the real GDP rate, I mean that's falling by the rate of 10%, and for European zone it's falling at the rate of 12.2%. As far as China and India are concerned, this rate is at the rate of 4%. And and McKinsey predicts that it would definitely take a good amount of time for these countries to come back to the normal, in the sense the pre-crisis time period. Looking at this, however, there is no doubt that we are going to, that the medicine and the genetic science is going to definitely find a cure, and we are going to defeat the pandemic eventually. But for time being, in order to kind of prevent the number of infections, there has to be the lockdown. And lockdown is not just flattening the curve of the COVID infections, but then it's also flattening the curve of or rather pulling down the curve of the GDP growth rate of the country also. So looking at few of the sectors here, I would like to start with a very positive note here. Even though we are talking about the decline in the GDP, there are few sectors, which are really making good. They're making use of this uncertainty, and they're really doing good. And if you look at these sectors are those sectors which are either on a digital platform, or they are into something which is bare basic necessity. Like talking about digital platform, I mean, few examples could be the media which is going digital, or it could be telecommunication service providers, the internet service providers. Look at us. I mean, most of the time we are online, and Zoom, the amount of usage has gone up by 300%. So otherwise, possibly they would not have got. So some of the sectors are really doing good, and education very it's a surprise here because education in India, there's a lot of apprehensions about online education. But then we are in a state wherein we are trying to accept this, kind of remote learning was something like, oh, is it really good? Or, is it really, considered? Is it recognized? Even all the stakeholders, be it the students, or be it the regulators, or be it the providers. So everybody had this apprehension. Apart from this, when it comes to necessities, somebody who is really gaining out of it, or rather, they are in a better, compared to the most of the sectors who are into loss, is the ones who are into consumer staples, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, and healthcare. And not to forget agriculture sector, which is generally doesn't make any noise. They are like. Even though some of the prices of some of the cash crops are declining, thanks to the Indian farmers for giving a very good harvest the last season. Today, if you look at the Indian government food stock, it's a record surplus, wherein it's more than 70 million tons. If this was not there, then possibly India would have been in a very worse scenario. There is so much of lockdown, and we are constrained to home, and if food was not available, then that's something which we really can't imagine. So on the downside, there are many sectors which are really suffering because of the lockdown. And these are majorly the consumer-oriented and the non-essential goods like travel, tourism, consumer durables, consumer discretionary spending, packaging, automobile and the components. One thing we need to really appreciate, even though they were in a full lockdown, they kept themselves busy and engaged, manufacturing ventilators and face shields for the front warriors of COVID-19. And one more sector which I would really like to talk a little on was the construction sector. This is construction and infrastructure sector, wherein this one sector which is badly hit, mainly because of the composition of the employment that it has. Almost 84% of the employment in this particular sector is for casual, so it comes from the informal sector. And as a result of the recent lockdown, 63 million the jobs have been lost, and this has led to a shoot in the informal unemployment rate to 31%. Now, because of the low performance of all these sectors, there has been a spillover effect on some of the essential service providers, also like transportation, logistics, energy, power, oil, and gas, chemicals, and some of the insurance companies as well. On the demand side, this is a little interesting, but then, however, may lose the attention of some of the policymakers. Of course, there is a huge demand from our side for the telecommunications and at-home entertainment services. And of course, a lot of health and wellness awareness has come to majority of us in India at least. And apart from that, some of those deteriorations that we see on the consumer side or the demand side is the travel plans have been postponed. There's a lot of uncertainty for the consumers also, for individuals. They're not really they do not have that job security, they never know, especially people working for the IT and ITS sectors. Companies are talking about layoffs and things like that. So they don't want to get committed with long-term investments. So real estate may also kind of get a hit because from the demand side. And many of the students who always aspire to go abroad to study, I think they may also kind of postpone their plans, maybe to the next year, of course. So when we visualize this dashboard of the economic performance, we see more firms or sectors lined up on the downside. That looks more heavier. So in addition to this, of course, there are a lot of these public Indian companies which are facing credit crunch. So this calls for a remedy action plan, both on a macro and a micro level. At the macro level, the recent stimulus package has announced a good number of, a good number of announcements wherein MSME is one sector which is highlighted, and next to that is the power sector. Real estate sector just gets few extension of the deadlines and things like that. MSME, this was long back pending, in fact, but then thanks that at least now the government has thought about it, and right from the definition of the MSMEs to hand-holding the stressed MSCs, they have the announcements, and they have injected a lot of money into it, and the government is trying to handhold the MSCs, and this really matters for the economy right now because this takes care of the most of the informal sector of India. So this is from the macro aspect. But however, just the changes in the macro aspect is not sufficient. There has to be a good amount of changes in the micro level also. So this calls for very well deliberated and planned strategy from the business leaders, in fact. So the need of the hour for the business leaders to look into is the depth of the disruption, the length of the disruption, which eventually helps them to look into a good restructure to build the resilience so that they can plan it very well. I just have to give 3 pointers here. I'll just give the 3 pointers and then just close it. So the most important things that the industry or the business leaders need to actually look into is there's going to be a dramatic shift in the consumer behavior post the release of the lockdown as well. So there is going to be a good amount of decline in the discretionary purchases, and there may be a few possible inorganic moves, wherein there may be a few mergers and acquisitions from the firm side also. And apart from this, most of the firms may go, on the digital platform. Today morning, Anand Mahindra tweets and he says that he's very proud about his firm, and they have become the nation's first comprehensive online car sellers now today. So they have launched the online platform for selling their cars. I think this is the way the business leaders and the government policymakers should kind of think about. I just leave it here, and the rest we can maybe cover in the questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kavita. I think that was quite. It was a lot of information for me to understand all the terms you were saying. But what I could take away is now we are relating all these threads about the points that you made, that this relief package is going to help the informal sector, which may be related to the number of jobs. With the
provided it flows down to the
So I was going to come to that. So provided it flows down, but yeah, I mean that's looking up for us, and maybe we can come back to it. There are several questions now coming up, and I'm sure we can cover it at the end. And I would not like to delay bringing on the next panelist on board. And thank you for your valuable input, Dr. Anil Kashyap. So Dr. Kashyap is currently the head of. He is the head of Department of Geography and Environmental Management, University of West of England, Bristol. Dr. Anil brings along a wealth of national and international experience of over 22 years in academia, research, and the public sector. And he has chaired a lot of important positions, including deputy head of school at Coventry University and professor and director of School of Real Estate in RICS School and Built Environment And he holds a bachelor degree by profession. He's civil engineering, master's in urban planning, and a PhD from University of Ulster, United Kingdom. And he's also a chartered member of the Royal Town Planning Institute, London, and a member of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, RICS, and a fellow of the Institute of Town Planners, ITPI, the most important organization of planning in India at the moment. So, I mean, among all of these accolades, I see a lot of things that you bring here, Dr. Kashyap, and I would like to use your expertise to air this question, which is the discussion started off with the impact, but I just touched upon what brought it about. But could you throw light on is COVID a result of our impact on the environment, and are we now going to look at how we behave ourselves? I would like to say how we behave ourselves with the environment. So it takes us back to what is the impact of this crisis on the environment around us at a local level as well as a global level, and what should be our learnings from this incident to take forward, as in how we act with our environment, within our environment rather. So welcome, and take the dais, Dr. Kashyap. Thank you.
Thank you, Tapasya, for the introduction. Was quite long and candid. So let me begin this one with two qualifying statements. One is that these environmental impact of COVID-19 are coming at the cost of other social and economic aspects of our lives. Then secondly is that nobody in this world was prepared to deal with this kind of unprecedented situation, or even anticipated some of the changes what we have experienced over last 50 to 55 days in the world. If we try and understand what has happened because of COVID-19, we were in lockdowns. So what does that mean? That lots of activities got stopped. We started working from home. There was no industrial activity. There were travel reduced. And that has naturally resulted into some sort of reduction in air pollution. You might have seen news items and messages around the quality of air in Delhi, quality of air in other places, even quality of water and water bodies, etc., has improved significantly. And that is because of the human activities, and it is linked to human and industrial activities around those sectors. So as a result of that, we still continue to live, and our supply chain, etc., how we source our daily living, how we work, how we fulfill our requirement, all that got shifted, which has impacted the supply chain aspects of our daily life requirements. If we look at from short-term perspective, we have significantly reduced our travel, we have significantly reduced our air pollution, and we have perhaps improved the biodiversity aspect of wildlife and flourishing of some of those aspects of biodiversity which were impacted by human activities. So this is, I would say, and term this as a short-term benefit. It's now. But what will happen as a medium term, which is in next 1 or 2 years, as I said in the beginning, that this has come, these environmental benefits or environmental impacts have come at the cost of economic activities and economic cost. The life will start and will bounce back very quickly. There has been job losses. There have been reduction in production. The demands will quickly rise. So there will be a response to all those aspects. And I am just, wondering as an environmentalist, I'm just wondering whether and it is my skepticism, whether the environment will be neglected in a short to medium term quite significantly. Or we were talking about climate change. Everybody was this was in top agenda. We were doing it, but that's a question to ourselves, that how we can afford to ignore or neglect our environment, and for how long. So that is something which policymaker need to take and consider all those things when formulating those policies. And I would be quite glad and would be quite pleased to hear from even countries or those packages which are being handed over. There can be some allocation to environmental aspects of things, where we can minimize and continue minimizing some of these impacts which were there because of our human activities, because something has been achieved, but it has been achieved by default, and let us see how that can be built upon. On a longer term basis, I'm thinking around how we can reconfigure our cities. There are discussion around in Paris or in New York, in Bristol, widening of cycle streets, social distancing, walking, pedestrian, all that. If we can build on some of these COVID-19 aspects and try and bring and make part of our life for a longer period of time, that will go a long way in improving our environment. In terms of supply chain as well, our behavior has changed to online shopping and online deliveries. How we can continue using some of these low carbon or low carbon footprint activities for longer term will be something which we need to build into our future thinking. Also, I quite liked the appeal of Prime Minister a couple of days ago about Swadeshi, or it links to environment quite clearly, where you are deglobalizing the production. So you are not relying on long haul flights or long haul transportation, cargo, and supply chain, etc., which is sustainable way of living. And if we can actually link that aspect quite cleverly into deglobalization of our production, and start using our capabilities and bring number of things home, that will have a long-term impact on our environment. So I'm finishing here, by saying that there are significant changes which have naturally happened. How we continue these for longer period of time, we have to build on those things. We should not lose some of these aspects. It has been blessing in disguise from environment point of view, not really from the health point of view, but and how we continue building on that is something we have to take it forward.
Thank you, Dr. Kashyap. That really brings forward the seriousness of this whole thing. Instead of enjoying videos of penguins crossing roads, we must be worried about when the penguins will have to go back to where they came from, and we will have to get on the road. So I guess that's a very wide perspective you build from the happy notes to probably the very difficult questions to take forward. And I think that leaves many people with questions to figure out through their research further, or maybe think about the line of action that they would like to build for themselves into this, helping with the situation. But that's a wonderful line of, I would say, comments from everybody. And I have pages of writing now with all the important words that we will take forward. But that, going back with your idea of this environment, we'll have to uphold it, do more work to kind of make it better. That looks like opportunity. It sounds like opportunity.
Down.
With us thinking about the bad impact, but I think this is also something that is looking up for us. And then taking it back to Dr. Kavita's mention of the rural sector and how the farmers are helping us with fighting this, or are they going to get, is that an opportunity for them directly to come to us instead of all these other in between stages? So lots of ideas here, but I will have to sort of now take questions because there are several on my board here, but I'm going to direct the most obviously the burning questions about the health impact. So Dr. Sharma, I have at least 10 or 12 of them here, but I'm going to bring it together, and I will really like to say two things that are very critical from I'm sorry, but I'm not able to name all the people who asked. One is the kind of symptoms. So people are asking if the symptoms are similar, same, they vary from person to person. How does one get around that? Would you like to answer that before I ask you the next question? Yeah, Dr. Sharma. You're still on mute, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing is that, Tapasya, I would like to address this question is that if we look from a biochemist point of view, life is nothing but one enzymatic reaction followed by another.
Mm-hmm.
It means that what kind of chemical reaction, what kind of biochemical reactions which are happening, and this biochemical reaction, I'm particularly talking about molecular interaction. If we look on to the virus is nothing but a nucleic acid wrapped inside a protein coat. How these protein interact with the immunoglobulins, suppose someone is already encountered some kind of viral infection. We don't know what kind of antibodies that person already have in the memory cells. So it is sort of, we can say that the symptoms, the degree of symptoms, the degree of impact may vary, but yes, it will work in the same line because it is the virus which infects the upper respiratory tract only. That's why corona means coronary means something upper side, not the lower side. So the symptoms will be similar in a person, but the degree of impact, it may be different from person to person on the basis of this biochemical interactions. Yeah.
Okay, that's a very, very well wrapped up question. The next question I think I would like to pose, I think it's got a double edge, so it's more interesting. We've got a question here, which is probably addressed to both Professor Pant and Dr. Sharma here, which is about online education. So Ajit Kumar Singh ji कह रहे हैं online शिक्षा स्वास्थ्य के दृष्टिकोण से कितनी सही है, in the sense if we can combine our reaction to health and as well as the psychological health of the student, and I would say it's more or less हमारी जो exchange है online स्टूडेंट और शिक्षक और बच्चे के बीच में वो कितनी हेल्दी है या कितनी अच्छी है हमारे लिए. सो इफ ईदर ऑफ यू बोथ ऑफ यू वुड लाइक टू से समथिंग.
मेरे ख्याल में अगर मुझे इजाजत दें शर्मा जी, मैं पहले बोल दूं उतावले स्वभाव के कारण, इसके पहले मुझे उठ के कहीं से आना पड़े फिर घंटी बजाए. लेकिन अजीत भाई दो बुनियादी सवाल उठा रहे हैं. क्या शिक्षा सिर्फ कक्षा में ही होती है या वो घर पर भी होती है या और माध्यमों से भी होती है? जब आप घर से बच्चा निकलता है, स्कूल की बस में बैठता है या रिक्शे में ले जाया जा रहा होता है, पैदल चल रहा होता है, तो सड़क पे उसकी निगाह विज्ञापनों पर पड़ती है जो उससे कुछ चीज बताती है. They might be advertisements about consumer goods. They might be feminist or gender biased advertisements. They might be targeting a particular community as the enemy of the nation. तो ये सारी शिक्षा चलती रहती है. और जहाँ तक डिजिटल माध्यमों से शिक्षा का प्रश्न है, शर्मा जी ने बिल्कुल सही बात कही थी कि हमारे समाज में आज भी ये डिजिटल साधन 30% लोगों के पास नहीं है. जिनके पास है, इस वेबिनार को भी कई लोग अपने स्मार्टफोन पे या नॉन स्मार्टफोन में सुन रहे होंगे. इसमें ऑप्शन आता है कि आप सिर्फ ऑडियो से जुड़ सकते हैं. मगर दूसरी बात ये कि हमारे स्वास्थ्य पर भी उसका प्रभाव पड़ता है. जब हम टेलीविजन देखते हैं, जब हम टैब पे वीडियो गेम खेलते हैं, तो उसका भी हमारे कुछ रैपिड आई मूवमेंट, हमारा स्लीप डिसऑर्डर्स, हमारी कार्पल टनल सिंड्रोम, हमारे मोटर रिफ्लेक्सेस, और जो लिविंग इन वर्चुअल स्पेस वर्सेस लिविंग इन रियल स्पेस है, तो एक तरह का ऑटिज्म भी उससे आता है. मगर उसकी शिकायत आज ही आप क्यों कर रहे हैं? उसकी चिंता तो आपको तब से होनी चाहिए थी जबकि इस देश में 2 तरह के अस्पताल नहीं है, 3, 4, 5 तरह के स्कूल हैं. विश्वविद्यालय ले लीजिए तो प्रोविंशियल स्टेट यूनिवर्सिटीज हैं, सेंट्रल यूनिवर्सिटीज हैं, सुपर स्पेशलाइज्ड प्राइवेट यूनिवर्सिटीज हैं, सेकंड क्लास यूनिवर्सिटीज हैं प्राइवेट. उसके अलावा इंटरनेशनल यूनिवर्सिटीज के कैंपसेस हैं. मुझे लगता है कि सारी शिक्षा में स्कूल लेवल पर ये कास्ट सिस्टम है, सो कॉल्ड पब्लिक स्कूल्स हैं, प्रिविलेज स्कूल्स हैं, आईसीएसई बोर्ड का सिलेबस है, सीबीएसई का है, स्टेट बोर्ड्स का है, टेक्स्ट बुक्स का अंतर है, टीचर्स की कॉम्पिटेंस का अंतर है. So somebody can afford to pay the teacher the top dollar, and I know private universities in India which are paying American dollars salaries to get people. I mean, there is a university where the presidential candidate like the Gopal Gandhi comes and lectures on history. But can everybody match that kind of a resource base? तो आप उसकी चिंता नहीं करें कि जब तक इस देश में जो शिक्षा है वो भी एक व्यवसाय है, और वो शिक्षा का अधिकार जो है वो 14 साल की उम्र तक लड़के के लिए प्राथमिक शिक्षा का है, और उसकी भी जो उसका जो यथार्थ है वो बहुत फर्क है. तो वी शुड वरी अबाउट द पेडागोजी, वी शुड वरी अबाउट द टेक्स्ट बुक, वी शुड वरी अबाउट द डिस्पैरिटीज इन एजुकेशन बिफोर वी टेक ऑन. जो है सो तो है. अगर बैलगाड़ी भी चल रही है, आदमी उसमें मदर इंडिया फादर इंडिया बन के अपने परिवार को खींच रहा सड़क पे, तो जो कुछ डिजिटल है उससे काम चलाइए, और उसको उसकी चिंता उसके स्वास्थ्य की प्रभाव की तब करेंगे. शर्मा जी ने बहुत महत्वपूर्ण सवाल उठाया था. मेरी चिंता का, और मेरे ख्याल में हमारी चिंता का विषय वो होना चाहिए कि जो लड़का आज म्युनिसिपल स्कूल में नहीं जा रहा है, इज बीइंग डिनाइड उसका मिड डे मील. तो मुझे उसके स्वास्थ्य की चिंता ज्यादा है पर डिजिटल डिसऑर्डर्स की. सॉरी आई टुक टू मच टाइम, बट
नहीं, थैंक यू सो मच. डॉक्टर संजीव, आप कुछ कहना चाहिए?
सबसे पहली बात तो ये है, जो इन्होंने बड़ा अच्छा सवाल उठाया कि ऑनलाइन शिक्षा. तो एक तो अभी प्रोफेसर पद ने बड़ा अच्छी बात कही कि कितने लोगों को अवेलेबल है. तो कहीं ऐसा तो नहीं कि जिनको अवेलेबल है वो तो इसका लेवरेज फायदा उठा लें, और जिनको अवेलेबल नहीं है वो एक मानसिक पीड़ा का शिकार हो जाए. नंबर 1. नंबर 2, अभी सर ने, प्रोफेसर पद ने कहा कि बच्चा जब घर से निकलता है और जब क्लासरूम तक पहुंचता है वहां तक काफी सीखता है, और क्लास में जो पीयर लर्निंग एक फैक्टर होता है, वो पीयर लर्निंग वो सीख नहीं पा रहा है, वो किसी से कह नहीं पा रहा है, उसको लैंग्वेज समझ में नहीं आ रही है, उसको मॉड्यूल समझ में नहीं आ रहा है, तो उसका भी एक दुष्प्रभाव पड़ता है. सो ऑनलाइन शिक्षा आज हमारी जरूरत हो सकती है, लेकिन क्या एक चॉक वन टॉक को कंप्लीटली रिमूव कर दे? नहीं, क्योंकि एक ब्लेंडेड लर्निंग आने वाला समय ब्लेंडेड लर्निंग का ही है, जहां पर ऑनलाइन शिक्षा का फायदा क्या है कि लर्नर और रिसोर्स के बीच का गैप कम कर रही है, बट टीचर और रिसोर्स को लाकर के टीचर को नहीं हटा रही. तो शिक्षा के बहुत सारे दृष्टिकोण हैं, तो इसका प्रभाव पड़ेगा डेफिनेटली स्वास्थ्य पर, मानसिक स्वास्थ्य पे ज्यादा, आईज पे ज्यादा, ब्रेन पे ज्यादा, अभी उन्होंने सर ने कहा. बट अभी हमारी जरूरत है, नेसेसिटी इज द मदर ऑफ इन्वेंशन, बट स्लोली वी विल लीड टू ब्लेंडेड लर्निंग इज द सॉल्यूशन. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. I think the next question, I think Dr. Sharma, you're going to be very busy. There are too many questions about health issues, but I will try and pose the ones which involve two panelists because it becomes more interesting. So the next question is directed towards Dr. Kavita and Dr. Sharma together, I would say, because Santosh Kamble is asking if we can improve the healthcare system in India from rural to urban. Because the situation that we are in and the government system is upgrading, what will be the basic role of science in improvement of the system? So I do not know. I think it's also got an economic angle. How you think how much can be invested in a rural sector, or how much should be or would be required to be invested in the current scenario. So over to both of you. Either of you could start. Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Kavita, you would like to address first the economical aspect? Yeah, your mic is mute.
Okay, so that's very interesting question. In fact, I think that's one of the concerns that concern that Indian policymakers also have to think about when it comes to Indian healthcare. Indian healthcare has the best of the best resources when it comes to the human capital. That is the doctors, be nurses, or anybody for that matter. They are wonderful, and they are very, very intelligent compared to and they are on par with that international standards and comparison. The one thing which is really kind of has become a divide here is when it comes to the rural and the urban healthcare sector. There is this huge problem of accessibility and affordability, both. So it's not just an issue of the rural India, but then it's also an issue of the urban India as well. So if you look at the accessibility, it's a major concern at the rural areas. When it comes to affordability, it's common for both, be it rural area or be it urban. So there are the best of the best corporate hospitals in the urban areas, but then look at the prices at which each and every treatment is, and it's not affordable by everybody. And to add to this, the insurance firms, the medical insurance firms, also has their role to play in here. So I guess these two are the major concerns, and it's really a tough job for the Indian economy right now to kind of club or kind of connect both the rural and the urban. So, but rural, there are still villages which do not have the bare basic health sector also. So I think India needs a long way to kind of, even though we keep talking about medical tourism and the amount of revenue that we are generating through medical tourism, healthcare. NH has gone to Cayman Islands; they have set a business there, right? But then all this is fine. But then when we look back at the rural India, in some of the villages, even accessibility is also a big issue. I hope it was an interesting question. Yet it is kind of very you really can't give the exact answer. It's not just a mathematical answer. So thank you for that question.
Tapasya, I just want to add that it's not a question of can. It's now is the need that we have to develop the health infrastructure of rural India, or rather the complete India. Indian is Indian, whether he is living in rural or in the urbanized. Indian is Indian. Life is equally important. Now coming to the solution aspect quickly. One thing is the resource. We have to generate the indigenous resources, ventilators, whatever it is required in current scenario, and that we have started working in that direction. Now the second is the skilled person. If you look on to the latest health sector bill, they have made so many changes to develop more and more health sector professionals who can work in health, not only the MBBS doctor, but the other paramedical, healthcare, allied health workers, they can support. That is second. Now the second part of the question, will science will support in this solution? So the answer is yes, because let's take an example. We suddenly realized the need of sanitizers, and sanitizers were out of the market. So many people who are having science background, they realized the component and they made a mix and match of other ingredients, and they provided the solution. So the science give you perspective of the problem, especially related to the disease system, illness, health, because health is based on science totally. So that's why, yes, basic knowledge of science will help not only in finding solution, but creating proper awareness as well as knowledge about the problem. So that will sort out this. Yes.
That's a very, very genuinely diverse answer, but I hope the question, whoever has posed the question is satisfied. And I see opportunity in both your answers. The opportunity for the rural sector to have some relief or some sort of voice that they are an integral part of us, and they are an integral part of everything, including our supply chain, and including the number of people who live in these areas and need better healthcare and better systems and better infrastructure, and as well as how we have a chance as an entire community to use simple science to kind of fight this at every level, not just at a medical level, and not just at the level of helping directly, but indirectly also. Many things can be invented in this situation. So that's a great answer, and I see that. I think the next one should be directed to, Dr. Kashyap. There are several of, would you like to add something, Dr. Kashyap, to that answer? Or yeah, so I wanted to pose the next question to you. There are several people who've asked a question which I'm not sure if I can request you to answer, which is how long is this lockdown going to last, or are we going to ever get out of this? So I'm not very sure if you would like to take that, but I have another question which is a very different one, but it's a take on environment. It says, so this is by Sammy, if I'm not wrong, and it says, is there any positive event coming after this historical negative event by the way of economy, development, and technology? Can these experiences give us more ideas to challenge life? And that's, I think, in a way related to how we deal with this immediate niceties about the environment, or the later part of it. So could you take that question, please? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Look, I see this as a fantastic opportunity, as a major opportunity for all of us to think slightly differently. There are always statements, and you might hear that this COVID-19 coronavirus is not going to go from here for long time. We need to build something which is, or we need to be resilient, and we need to prepare our society to be resilient to live with coronavirus, as we are living with HIV or some other viruses or other health issues. So this is an opportunity, and some of these opportunity and ideas can be further built, even for example, social distancing. Even for example, how we work from home, how we reduce our travel, how we cut down on number of things, even education part as well. Our university is dealing with education online versus face-to-face debate at the minute as well. So this poses number of research opportunities as well as number of practical opportunities for our policymakers. And I heard from one of my batchmate, a planner working with Government of India, that they have started now thinking about new planning norms for cities around social distancing, which is a great initiative. So this gives us opportunity how we think and how we lay our infrastructure, how we build our future homes, how we make our social activities in such a way that there are some of these aspects of social distancing or preventing the spread of the coronavirus, or even preventing some of these impacts as well, and how we prepare ourselves for that. So there are a whole lot of opportunities, not even from the environment point of view, but there are opportunities from policy making, from new ideas, how embedding digitization, digital lifestyle into, and how we avoid unnecessary things which have been happening by default so far. Mm-hmm. And one of the example which I can give here about face-to-face and online learning, how much of face-to-face is required. So we need to calibrate that. At the minute, my university is actually talking about more face-to-face when students join the university, and when they settle into the university system, perhaps less of the face-to-face requirement, and then they are more independent. They know how to access system, how to access infrastructure, how to access software. So we are talking about not having computers on the university campus, but providing software access to their laptops, and they can work from anywhere. They don't have to come to university to access specialized softwares, for example, and they can have like a cloud software where they can access from anywhere. So building those flexibility provides us lots of opportunity going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Kashyap. I think we're just running out of time, but I would like to address one last probably question. Since Dr. Pant, you brought up the idea of your granddaughter wondering what to do when she gets back to school, and this is a question about the mindset of people. And I mean, I think even Dr. Sharma can pitch in a little bit. It says it says how to bring back normal mindset of people, especially the student community after the reopening of schools. And there are several other questions, including one about talking about us going back to work. So there's going to be an economic question within it. So I'll end with that. But at the moment, what is it that is to expect when the lockdown lifts, or we start doing more face-to-face than FaceTime? Then what is the change in mindset which we already are experiencing? How will we live with it? I can't say undo it, but live with it or delve upon it, and what should be our approach rather? Yeah.
I think it's a very difficult question to answer because there is a strong subjective element to it. To go back to my own example, I was surprised that the granddaughters did not discuss this question with their parents. They came to a grandfather who they thought was wiser and was detached and would had loved them more than their parents who were busy with their own problems. So I think she came to me as a counselor. And I don't know whether I can say that I'm worthy of their trust, but I told them that my view of what is happening is probably a bit fossilized because I am a product of all old times. And you probably should talk to your parents, who are, as Dr. Sharma did mention, the peer group. But when you talk to the peer group on the net, they were very tense because there was this boys' Docker story doing rounds, the teenager committing suicide rounds. Now these are the hazards of living in two realms at the same time: the virtual space and having total strangers mentoring or misleading you, your peers who have been taken away from your life, and you have been forced into a juxtaposition with your parents with whom you did not have a bonding for long. So I think, at the age where the parents are out of your life, there's a problem. It's a very difficult question to answer. How do you help reassure anybody, and more than that, reassure yourself that there is light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, I would like to add to this, Tapasya.
So
The bigger question is not whether the granddaughter want to go to school or will.
Yeah.
Are we ready to send her to school?
Absolutely, sir.
That is a bigger question. The
That is
thing
the
is that it's not the first pandemic this world has seen, and it's not going to be the last one. We have faced pandemic earlier also with a lot of similar impacts, or rather you can say more serious impacts. And right now also it is very, very, you can say, too early to quantify the ultimate size of these effects. And whatever decision the policymakers have taken or they are going to take, the sensible decisions will definitely play a critical role in determining the scale of damage caused by this pandemic. Now, coming on to this answer to this solution and this problem, I always believe that when going gets tough, tough gets going. And whenever we are not getting an answer, we have to go with the statistics. We can simply see that just by simple prevention of social distancing or mask or little bit, and we must accept that it was not also taken care properly by more than 20-25% of the entire population of the country, we are able to minimize or we are able to restrict the pandemic to a certain extent in such a big diverse country. So definitely life is not going to stop. We have to adapt ourselves, and it's always better to have a mask than to have a tablet. So medicine. So once we take certain precautions, it's not an allergy that we are going out and we are suffering from this allergy. It's not, it is something for the preventive measures we have to take till the time the vaccine is there, and every problem has a solution. It is not that such problem that there's no solution, so ultimately everyone is going to die. That's my input.
thank you, Dr. Sharma. I think that's a very positive end to that question. I wasn't able to think of posing it, any softer. I think we just doing good time, and just have probably one last little thing that I would like to pose, which is taking forward some other ideas that have come forward. Maybe we can answer them, or maybe we can leave them for later. I will just open it to anybody who would like to answer. There are 2 or 3 questions about the role of machine learning, digitization, digital platforms, and the way we will deal with this situation. From the head counting of people who are infected or quarantined, to how we will deal with remedials in the future, to going forward with what you were saying, the hybrid kind of learning, or hybrid sort of working environment, where there will be partly digital, partly face to face. So if any of the panelists would like to address this question to you. Well, we see a role of technology, but how much of it is relevant for us? If any of you would like to take this question. I mean, I do not know if one particular person should be should be answering this, but yeah, what would be your take on it? Yeah.
I think Dr. Sharma did make a very, very valid point that like in teaching, there has to be a merged, mixed hybrid model. You have hybrid cars, you have, adaptations, and you try to make do with what you have, and you hope to do better the next time you devise a solution to the problem. I think that is going to happen to machine learning, digital learning, and it's very interesting to talk of artificial intelligence. But before you put the word prefix before the intelligence, there has to be intelligence. And there has to be intelligence combined with compassion before you have a solution to a human problem. You cannot have a machine decide for you how you will live and what the quality of your life is. We are still not in the science fiction world.
Yes.
Very valid point.
Absolutely.
Can
Yes,
I,
please. Please.
I guess the industry can really make use of this, because many of the industries, many of the sectors, many of the firms have started talking about Industry 4.0. So I think, the business analytics, the big data, these are the ones, artificial intelligence, blockchain technology. I think these are the ones which are really kind of going to play a major role here. So I guess, anybody who is looking for, any firms who are looking for Industry 4.0, they can actually incorporate this. But then when it comes to individuals like us, I think it's not really good and healthy for us to be too much online. So I guess, that's my opinion. That's so even because even when it comes to education also, we keep talking about blended learning. But then how many of us really know what exactly is like remote learning, the online teaching? It has to have a synchronous and asynchronous learning. And it's not a very easy job to kind of prepare for one lecture or, create material for one lecture. So there is a huge amount of work, and hats off to anybody who runs this online courses, certificate courses. MOOC has wonderful courses. We have asked to kind of do a few courses there. So, there is a lot of effort, in fact, which goes into it. But then somehow, yeah, it is good. It's good, but then yes, face to face, a blended learning would be better, like how what Dr. Sharma said. So this is my personal opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Kashyap. Would you like to add something? Do you think your goal of positive carbon footprint, rather even not zero carbon footprint but positive, can it be revolutionized? This idea can be implemented faster with us turning to machine learning, turning to AI or machine learning. Would you like to comment upon that?
Yeah, I think there are opportunities, Tapasya, to bring technology into the future solutions. And that's true in all the sectors. It's true in supply chain, it's true in marketing, it's true in even, online sale and purchase of building, housing, even cars. One of the panelists, you were mentioning about the cars being sold online. So that is, and that database and big data, there is a role of big data to be played into future lifestyle of ourselves. Yeah, indeed, even in education as well, blended learning, is something to start with, but there will be more hybrid or more developed ideas coming forward, I can see. And this is just a beginning, because even the developed world universities, they were not even ready for this kind of lockdown and quickly changing into online mode and all that. And we did honestly do a good job to begin with, but I don't think we can continue doing that type of thing. We need some lot of improvement into digital learning and use of machine data, all those things, and how we can actually make our decisions better. That's the way forward.
I'm an optimist. Dr. Sharma, do you want to?
Yes, I just one quick addition. There's a saying that man makes the habit, habit makes the man. But same is not true for the technology. When we are saying, as Professor Pant rightly mentioned, when we are saying artificial intelligence, who has added this intelligence in the machine? The human being, the human intelligence. The question is that, yes, it could be a tool but it can't be a solution. Now, the bigger question is that in case of whether it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, yes, they are very good tools. Heart, structure of heart is difficult to show, but by the help of this technology, the three-dimensional, every aspect we can show. But again, there's an important question, Tapasya. I'm focusing only in Indian scenario, the three: acceptability, availability, and affordability. We have to look from that perspective. We have to look from the way that it should not create more and more divide. The blended learning is a solution, agreed. But if we are making it as a complete solution or complete dependency on it, these three A's, affordability, acceptability, and availability, that will definitely create resistance in the path. So we have to think from that aspect also.
Like I was saying before we were talking, I am an optimist. Amongst all of this, I see that now we have to focus on affordability and probably, make solutions that are for everyone. So
Everyone.
our outreach has to outnumber. It cannot be one person. It cannot be one section. It has to be everybody. We have to get everybody on board. So that takes us to inclusivity. So I guess, every action that all of us, including all the people with us right now, should focus on how many people, and takes us back to the Gandhian idea of, if you can affect more number of people, then you've taken the right decision, kind of a thing, which somebody was mentioning. Are we going back to the Gandhian way of living with frugality and, doing basic things ourselves? So, I guess we had a very, very interesting session. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I'm sure many of us here did so. And with the wind blowing outside in the Gurgaon, the environment taking over, and there's storms, sandstorm hitting every other day, Delhi scenario. I think this is a great point to end. We're almost there. There's a minute to go. I take this opportunity to thank all the panelists, Professor Pant, Dr. Kashyap, Dr. Mathur, and Dr. Sharma. On behalf of Ansar University, I really, really thank you for having made it to this platform and shared with us so many different perspectives. I probably would also like to apologize if I did raise my hand when I shouldn't have. But thank you for helping us, also keeping it together and tight and on time and online. And I hope that we are going to, with all the number of ideas which have come on the question board, we haven't been able to address, we're going to take forward in the other webinars, and they themselves will become more and more conversations, and maybe as a community we'll come together to help each other get better in this situation and become happier. So on that note, I thank you again. Thank you for coming. And
thank you, Tapasya.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was lovely.
It was
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.